Hello everyone, and welcome back to the FIT AZ-900 Azure Fundamentals Masterclass. Throughout this course, we've learned how to build Azure infrastructure, we've created virtual machines, configured virtual networks, and secured our environment with network security groups. We've explored Azure Policy, Resource Logs, Azure Monitor, Azure Advisor, ARM template, and most recently, we learned how Azure organizes resources using management groups, subscriptions, resource groups, and resources. But today, I'd like you to think about Azure from a different perspective. Imagine you are the owner of a hospital, or perhaps you are the director of a bank, or maybe you are responsible for the IT systems of a university or a government agency. Would you simply move your organization's data to the cloud without asking a few important questions? Most likely, you wouldn't. You'll probably ask questions like, how secure is my data? Who owns my data once it's stored in Azure? Can Microsoft employees read my files? Where is my data physically stored? Does Azure comply with regulations such as GDPR? How do I know I can trust Microsoft with sensitive information? These are exactly the kinds of questions organizations ask before adopting cloud services. And that's why Microsoft provides the Microsoft Trust Center. Today's lesson is all about understanding how Microsoft builds trust with its customers through security, privacy, compliance, and transparency. By the end of this lesson, you will understand the difference between security and privacy, what compliance means, how Azure supports regulatory requirements, and why millions of organizations trust Microsoft Azure to host their most important workload. Let's begin. Before we open the Microsoft Trust Center, let's first understand something very important. What does the word trust actually mean? In everyday life, trust means having confidence that someone will do what they say they will do. For example, if you leave your car with a trusted mechanic, you expect them to repair it, not misuse it. If you deposit money in a bank, you trust that the bank will protect it. If you send your child to school, you trust that the school will provide a safe learning environment. Cloud computing works exactly the same way. When organizations move their data and applications to Microsoft Azure, they are placing an enormous amount of trust in Microsoft. They are trusting Microsoft to protect their systems, secure their information, respect their privacy, and provide reliable cloud services. Microsoft understands this responsibility, which is why it created the Microsoft Trust Center. Kindly open your browser and head over to google.com and let's do a simple Google search for Microsoft Trust Center. I'll hit enter. Then I'll head over to Microsoft Trust Center overview, or you can come all the way down Microsoft Trust Center where you choose your location. So depending on where you're watching from. So depending on where you are, I'm in the United Kingdom. So I'll just hit on United Kingdom to take me to their Trust Center page. And this particular website is Microsoft Public Resource for explaining how it approaches security, privacy, compliance, and responsible with AI. And you can see all of that here. Then you can just take a bit of a time, watch the video, scroll through the pages, and read for yourself. But I'm just going to explain share some insights into that. And one thing I appreciate about a trust center is its transparency. You know, Microsoft doesn't simply tell customers that Azure is secure. Instead, it explains the technologies, policies, certifications, and processes it uses to help protect customer data. So think of the Trust Center as Microsoft's promise to you, that is the customer, And it's where organizations can learn how Microsoft safeguards information, complies with regulations, and earns customer trust. And you will notice that the Trust Center brings together several important topics. So at the very top, we have different sections, and it include responsible AI, security, privacy, compliance. We've got product and services, then tools and what? Documentation. But today, our focus will be on the areas most relevant to the AZ-900 certification. So I want us to begin with security. So when you go to security, we go about four major sections that you can click through. So take your time, click through, go through the page, and get to know stuff for yourself. So we see that security is all about protecting systems, applications, and data from unauthorized access, attacks, or damage. So you have a house, and I'm sure you probably have locks on your doors. And maybe in certain advanced situations, you definitely have security cameras, and you might even have an alarm system. And these measures don't stop you from living in your home. Instead, they help protect it from people who shouldn't have access. So Azure Security works in a very similar way. Microsoft invests billions of dollars every year into cybersecurity. Azure uses technologies such as encryption, identity protection, threat detection, and continuous monitoring to help protect customer environment. And if you cast your mind back, we learn about Microsoft Entra ID. I remember how we configured multi-factor authentication. That was one example of Azure security in action. And we also learn about network security groups, and those helped us control which network traffic could reach our virtual machine. So Azure policy helped us enforce organizational rules. Resource logs, as we know, protected important resources from accidental deletion. Azure Monitor helped us detect unusual activity. And although these services seem different, they are all working together to improve the security of our Azure environment. So security, therefore, isn't one single feature. It's a collection of technologies and best practices working together to protect our cloud environment. Okay. Azure. Now, let's move on to another term that people often confuse with security, and that is privacy. So I'll go to privacy overview, and your job is to go through and read for yourself. And although they are related, privacy and security are not the same thing. Security focuses on protecting information. Privacy focuses on controlling information. And I'm going to explain that with a simple example. So imagine you keep personal documents inside a locked safe. The lock provides security because it helps prevent unauthorized access. And now imagine that you decide who is allowed to open that safe, and that decision represents privacy. So in Azure, Microsoft provides a secure cloud platform, but your organization remains the owner of its data. Microsoft doesn't suddenly become the owner of your customer records, financial information, emails, or business documents simply because they are stored in Azure. And this is one of the most important messages Microsoft communicates through the Trust Center. So as you read, you get to understand that you own your data, and Microsoft is just there to provide the cloud services. And your organization controls how its data is used, accessed, and managed. And that is privacy. And one of the questions organizations often ask is, can Microsoft employees read my data? The answer to this particular question is no. Microsoft has strict policies and technical controls governing access to customer data. Access is tightly controlled, monitored, and limited to specific situations such as approved support requests. Even then, strict procedures are followed. So this commitment to protecting customer privacy is one of the reasons Azure is trusted by government, healthcare providers, banks, universities, and businesses around the world. I want us to pause for a quick knowledge check and think carefully about these questions. What is the difference between security and privacy? And who owns customer data stored in Azure? So if you've been following, we know that security protects data and privacy determines who controls that data. And when it comes to ownership of data, it is the customer that owns that particular data. And Microsoft will just provide a cloud platform, but does not take ownership of customer information. So I'll need you to get that distinction. And these are common concepts tested in the AZ-900 exam. So make sure you understand the distinction. Having clarified the difference between security and privacy, I want us to move on to another important concept you'll see throughout Microsoft's documentation. And that particular concept is called compliance. So what then is compliance? And in its simple terms, we just following rules. Every country, industry, and organization has laws, regulations, and standards that must be followed. So an example is a hospital must protect patient records. Banks also have that responsibility of protecting financial information. And schools also have that same responsibility of protecting students' data. And yes, the government has a responsibility to protect sensitive national information. So simply storing data in the cloud isn't enough. Organizations must also ensure that they comply with the laws and regulations that apply to them. And that's where Azure helps. And, and you notice that Azure does not automatically make an organization compliant. And this is one of the biggest misconceptions among beginners. So imagine buying the latest car with all the newest safety features. The car includes seatbelt, airbags, anti-lock brakes, and many other safety systems. But if the driver ignores traffic laws, drives recklessly, or refuses to wear a seatbelt, owning that car doesn't automatically make them a safe driver. You know what I mean? So Azure works in much the same way. Microsoft provides a cloud platform with many compliance tools and certifications. However, it's still the customer's responsibility to configure those services correctly and operate them in a compliant manner. And I want you to think of Azure as providing the tools, and your organization is responsible for using them correctly. And as I scroll through Microsoft compliance information, which is the overview page, you will notice, references to many well-known, standards um, and regulations. Okay, so you don't need to memorize. Let's see, compliance offerings, regulations. So you see, regulations are all here. Data sovereignty and regional regulation requirements. We scroll, then we can go all the way back up. Click again, EU regulations, we have DORA compliance, EU AI Act, European Digital Resilience, regional and country compliance, and what? Accessibility. So organizations often look for ISO certifications because they demonstrate that security processes have been independently assessed against internationally accepted world standards. And if an organization handles the personal data of EU citizens, then GDPR may apply regardless of where the organization is located. Okay. And there are certain certifications that you may come across, like the SOC, which relate to service organization control, and the HIPAA, which applies to the protection of healthcare information in the United States. So the important thing to remember isn't the detailed requirement of each regulation. Okay. Instead, remember that Microsoft Azure supports many international compliance standards, helping organizations meet their own regulatory obligations. So that I think will be a wrap for this. And I want us to look at another important concept, which is data residency. Okay. So when you look at the term data residency, it sounds a bit technical, but it's actually very simple. Data residency refers to where your data is physically stored. And we're going to use an example. So let's assume that our company is based in the United Kingdom and decides to deploy Azure resources into the UK South Azure region. In many cases, your data will remain stored within that selected region, helping your organization meet local business or regulatory requirement. So think of renting a storage unit. So if you rent a storage unit in London, your belongings stay in London. And similarly, when you choose a particular Azure region, you are choosing where your data will primarily reside. And this concept is called what? Residency. So organizations often choose regions based on performance, legal requirements, and business continuity planning. But if you check from previous lessons, when we started creating our virtual machines, selecting the Azure region, and mostly focused on the US West, even though I'm based in the UK, and it was primarily based on the cost consideration. But whatever be the case in reality, whichever region you are situated in, that is where you deploy your resource to. Okay. And I want us to also look at another term that learners often, get confused. And we have data sovereignty. And although it sounds familiar, it's not the same thing. So data sovereignty refers to which country's laws govern your data. So let's imagine a company stores its data in a data center located in the United Kingdom, and the data physically resides in the UK. However, the legal obligations affecting the data may also depend on UK legislations and any applicable international agreement. So, in simple terms, data residency asks, where is my data stored? And data sovereignty will ask the question, which country's laws apply to my data? So don't get confused. And that is a distinction I want you to get from this. And Microsoft provides documentation to help organizations understand these considerations when designing their cloud environment. And I want us to look at another important concept in Azure security, and that is called shared responsibility model. And we've mentioned briefly in our earlier lessons, but now let's bring everything together. Many people assume that once they move to the cloud, Microsoft becomes responsible for absolutely everything, and that isn't true. Instead, Microsoft and the customer share responsibility. So let's think about renting an apartment. The landlord is responsible for maintaining the building itself. They repair the roof, they maintain the elevators, they ensure the building remains structurally safe. But once you move into the apartment, you are responsible for locking your own door, deciding who has looking after your personal belongings. So cloud computing works in exactly the same way. So Microsoft, in this case, is responsible for the physical data centers, Microsoft will manage the servers, maintain the networking infrastructure, protect the physical buildings, replace failed hardware, but you, the customer, will be responsible for managing users, creating passwords, assigning permissions, protecting sensitive business information, configuring applications, and managing customer data. And that is why it's called the shared responsibility model. So both Microsoft and the customer have responsibilities. So understanding where those responsibilities begin and end is a fundamental concept for the AZ-900 exam. And I want us to move into the Service Trust Portal, okay? And this provides organizations with access to compliance documentation, audit reports, certifications, and security information related to Microsoft Cloud services. And unlike the Public Trust Center, some areas of the Service Trust Portal require authentication because they contain documents intended for Microsoft customers and auditors. So, as an Azure administrator or IT professional, you may use the Service Trust Portal when preparing for security audit, reviewing compliance reports, or gathering documentation required by your organization. So for the AZ-900 exam, you simply need to understand its purpose. So think of it as Microsoft's library of trust and compliance documentation. So this is our Service Trust Portal homepage. So you can just take your time, sign in, just familiarize yourself with everything that you see over here. And we're going to bring everything together. And we've explored four closely related concepts. Security, we say, protects systems and data from threats. Privacy ensures customers retain control over their own information, and compliance help organizations meet legal and regulatory requirements. And trust, as we know, is built through transparency, security, privacy, and compliance working together. And although these concepts are different, they all contribute to the confidence organizations have when choosing Microsoft Azure. So we're going to do a little review of today's lesson with some few questions. So I will ask the question, you pause for a moment, then you can play to listen to the answer. So what is the Microsoft Trust Center? The Microsoft Trust Center is Microsoft's public resource explaining how it approaches security, privacy, compliance, and responsible AI. Now let's move on to question number 2. Does Microsoft own customer data stored in Azure? The obvious answer is no. The customer always owns their data, and Microsoft provides the cloud platform but does not take ownership of customer information. Now let's move on to question number 3, which is what? Compliance. So what then is compliance? Compliance means following applicable laws, regulations, and industry standards. And Azure provides tools to help organizations meet these requirements, but organizations remain responsible for using those tools correctly. And let's look at question number 4. What is the difference between data residency and data sovereignty? So data residency refers to where data is physically stored, and data sovereignty refers to which country's laws apply to that particular data. And the last but not the least is, what is the shared responsibility model? And this means that Microsoft and the customer each have responsibilities for securing cloud environment. And Microsoft manages the cloud infrastructure while customers manage their own identities, data, applications, and configurations. So a quick recap of what we have covered today. So we introduced the Microsoft Trust Center and explained how it helps organizations understand Microsoft's approach to security, privacy, compliance, and what transparency. And we also learned that Microsoft security focuses on protecting systems and information, while privacy focuses on who controls that information. And we went on to discuss compliance and explored how Azure supports many international standards and regulations. And we also distinguished between data residency and data sovereignty. And we finally revisited the shared responsibility model and understood how Microsoft and customers work together to secure cloud environments. And these concepts are essential not only for passing the AZ-900 exam, but also for understanding why organizations trust Microsoft Azure with critical business workloads. Excellent work. Today's lesson may not have involved deploying virtual machines or configuring networks, but it covered something just as important. Cloud adoption isn't only about technology, it's also about trust. Organizations need confidence that their data is secure, their privacy is respected, and the cloud platform supports their regulatory requirements. Microsoft has invested heavily in all of these areas, and that's one of the reasons Azure has become one of the world's leading cloud platforms. In our next lesson, we will explore another important topic that organizations care about, and that is the Service Level Agreement, commonly known as SLAs. We will learn how Microsoft measures availability, what uptime percentages really mean, and how to calculate expected downtime. And this is an area that frequently appears in the AZ-900 certification exam. If you found this lesson helpful, please like the video, subscribe to the FIT channel, and share it with someone preparing for the Microsoft Azure Fundamentals certification. Thank you for watching, and remember the FIT's philosophy. Understand first, practice second, and conveniently master both. I'll see you in the next lesson.